Hey everyone, welcome back to the arena. I'm MD, joined here by Covey, and once again, an awesome guest that we can't wait to get into. First and foremost, love and appreciation to all of those that continue to support us.
What's up, guys? As MD said, we've got another awesome guest here sitting to my left. This is Jaz Jackson. Jaz goes to the same gym as me, and she's the founder and CEO of JSculpt Fitness. And there's a couple kind of little childs here and there, JSculpt or Sculpt 42. Jaz is also a mother. But without further ado, Jaz, why don't you just provide a background on who you are, who is Jaz Jackson, and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Jaz Jackson. I am the founder of JSculpt Fitness. We've been in business since 2017, and that business started because I myself gone on a major weight loss journey. I had lost 50 pounds, and I did so because I was trying to find more holistic ways to battle my depression. And my doctor at the time had informed me that instead of taking medication, there were some other avenues that I could take into course, which was journaling, exercising, meditation, and getting outside and just kind of being with nature. And so I was like, well, I never tried that before, so let me see if it would work, and it actually did. Through that, I was using my platform to kind of show my audience my journey, and I would get a lot of questions of how I went about my weight loss journey. And through that, a community was built. And if I could be honest, I was like, well, this is a great opportunity to try to see if I can start a business. And JSculpt Fitness was born. So let's say fast forward to 2020. Now, by that time, I had gained the weight back, kind of fell back into depression again, and I had to lose the weight once more. So another 50 pounds. I've lost 50 pounds twice, so I would say a total of 100 pounds. but at that time, my audience again was like, well, how are you doing this? And I was with my personal trainer, Hector. And Hector and I was like, well, you know what? Let's package this up and give it to the public, and Sculpt 42 was born.
So, I guess first, what was interesting to me is when you, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it was like to experience depression,
Yeah.
what that experience is like, but I'm just curious, was when you were diagnosed, was the first course of treatment, was it medication?
Yes.
So that's just interesting to me that it wasn't the journaling,
Yeah.
exercising, meditation, which all sounds like it worked. And if you would have started there,
Right?
there would have been no medication in the first place. It's just interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, but unfortunately, we live in America.
Yeah, we live in a capitalist society.
We live in, right, exactly. And so, not to get too far deep into it, but that's a part of their job to.
Yeah.
And I'll never be the person to say do not do it. If it's needed, then by all means try it. But I was going through too many side effects with the medication that was given to me, and also they were. They'll have you cycled on something for 6 months, and then you'll say, well, it's doing this to me. And then they'll say, well, I have something for the side effects. So you're just compiling, medication. And eventually I just was like, I can't do this anymore. I don't know the name of the medication I was taking at the time, but I a couple of things stood out to me that I'll never forget. At one point, I was overeating. Whatever the medication side effect was making me eat too much. And then I was under eating. I lost a ton of weight, and then another time, it turned me into a zombie. So I would like wake up in the middle of the night, and I was dating this guy at the time. It was the weirdest story, but he had to record me because I would wake up and I would be extremely aggressive towards him, and the next day he would say like, you don't remember what you did last night? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he literally like voice recorded me. I had no recollection of what took place the night before based upon this medication I was taking. So obviously I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. And my doctor was, it was a little hush hush, like, well, you could. you could just work out. So I'm like, well, okay, I'll try that. And, I will say it helped a lot. It helped a lot. But you still have to take other means to help battle depression, because I can't just give it all to exercise. I did start going to therapy and things of that sort. And so it was more like everything all together was more of a melting pot of being able to handle.
Yeah,
depression.
More holistic, natural approach.
Yeah.
Right. And then in terms of like, maybe just talk through your earliest bouts with depression, where you think it might have stemmed from, what it feels like to be in that state, and then ultimately kind of how you're able to pull yourself out of it.
That's a good question. So I grew up very humbly. My mother, I was raised by a single mother, but unfortunately my mother battled greatly with drug abuse. And so I grew up in an environment that was chaotic, and it was a lot of things happening as a child. So it's my belief that I dealt with depression as a young girl, and it just kind of grew with me throughout my life, and so it became my normalcy. So I really didn't know life outside of having these swings of moods, because it was just with me since I was a child. It wasn't until I started dating and became an adult and was living with my then boyfriend, he was able to tell me, like, something isn't quite right. I think you should go speak to someone. But that wasn't until 2012. So I was clinically diagnosed in 2012 with depression and anxiety, and then that led me on the journey to healing, if you will. But I was in my early 20s. I wasn't comfortable with telling people something was wrong with me. I was uncomfortable with having to wake up and take medication every day. It was just, I wasn't prepared for that lifestyle. And so I would do the medication for a little while, and then I'd come off of it and back and forth. And then it wasn't until my late 20s, early 30s that I started to take it seriously.
What was the relationship between your weight and the depression? Did you notice that, you'd maybe look at yourself in the mirror and like the feelings of sadness or shame or anything like what you would feel from being depressed, like would that bubble up in that form? Or was it that because you were depressed, you would maybe, comfort food, right, and like eat a lot, and wow, just describe the relationship between your physical health and your mental health?
It's definitely the latter. It was a byproduct of me being sad a lot of the time that I would emotionally eat. So I would eat a lot, and if I was if I was sad, if I was mad, if just like any swing of emotion would cause me to eat, and then after a while that becomes a pattern. Mm-hmm. And so you're used to eating, and then if you're not eating, we can become granular in like it's not protein, I'm eating junk food, right? So now we know what happens when you're eating a ton of junk food. You want to eat more junk food, mm-hmm. right? So I'm gorging on snacks all the time, chips and soda and fast food, and before you look up, you're not moving around. At that time, I absolutely was not like a gym girl. You couldn't pay me to walk into a gym. I wasn't very active as a teen, so I was a couch potato.
And the gyms, like the gym having been like the environment that you ultimately needed to do the movements that you required to get to a physical, better physical state, like speak to, as a woman, right, like what are the barriers to entry for a gym, right? Like how, was there a lot of insecurity? Was there a lot of courage that you needed to build up? Like what did it ultimately take while battling depression to actually get you maybe comfortable going to a gym?
I think ultimately when you're tired of being in a place in your life, like you're ready to make a change. And so for me, there wasn't much barrier between me saying that I want to reach this goal. So I didn't have some of the worries that a lot of women do when they go to the gym. You know, they don't want people to stare. They don't want people to see the weight gain that they've had. Well, for me, it was nothing about that. It was like I need to heal myself. I was told that this was how I could do it, and I'm gonna do it.
So you mentioned that you still, maybe as recently of 2020 or experience. When did you start therapy?
I want to say like 2013.
Okay,
Yeah.
so in getting therapy, and you mentioned you still will go through as of recently of like kind of COVID time frame, like bouts of depression. How has therapy helped? How has therapy helped evolve your kind of relationship with depression, if you will? Have you learned tools that have given you the opportunity to kind of like understand when maybe you're kind of in it, how to get out of it? Like, just talk to that about it.
Yeah. Okay. So the thing about depression is, it really is a neurological thing that's happening, right? And there's a lot of studies that show that if you are in a state of depression for long enough, it actually rewires the brain, and so you have a larger chance of leaning towards negative thoughts, or like your body is adjusted to releasing these hormones that come when you have bouts of depression, right? So I'm never too far away from it, right? And we all, I mean, we're adults, we have our stressors in life, and so it, those things never go away. So those can be triggers. So therapy teaches you the tools to combat the triggers that could trigger you into a bout of depression. So I say that I am in recovery, right? Because like I said, as a child, I feel as though I've had this following me since I was a child. So it's never too far away from me, but I've learned tools through therapy, through exercise, the foods that I eat, we know that there's studies that show that if, the type of chemicals that I put in certain foods can actually aid in depression as well. So learning to stay away from them or not consuming them as much, like just being very self-aware to kind of keep that off of me.
What are some examples, or an example of a trigger, and then as well as an example of a tool that you've learned to combat that trigger?
Oh, that's a really good question. I will say that because of my upbringing, I am often triggered by, how do I say, my lifestyle changing, because I've built this career now. I have a pretty sizable following, and I've learned to be able to take care of my son and I. And so if there are triggers around, let's say I'm having a slow season, which is something that I had to learn, because we all go through these seasons with business, especially if you're selling to the public. I would be triggered by the fear of losing everything. Well, I have to go back to therapy and my teachings through therapy that has taught me to actually talk myself through what I'm fearing. Right? So for example, I don't know, just throwing something out there. Money's low this month. Okay, well, Jazz, sales are low this month. We know that, but we also know that we've saved up enough money, just in case for the rainy day, right? Being able to talk myself through moments that otherwise I would just kind of sulk in them, and it might trigger me wanting to overeat.
Yeah, because I think down the point on fear, a lot of our fears are irrational.
Yeah.
And when then anxiety kicks in, it makes them even more irrational. Yeah. And it sounds like you've been able to kind of help rationalize that, like, hey, yeah, things aren't going well, but I recognize things aren't going well, and this is a temporary problem, or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is great, and I can relate to that personally as well, just with my thought patterns. Like, it's very easy for me now to say, oh, Matt, you're doing it again. Like, they call it in coaching like a saboteur, if you've heard of that. But it's basically like that voice that's always telling you you're not good enough, that's criticizing you. that's telling you you're not worth whatever it is, that you shouldn't do this thing, it's easy for me to identify when that voice is coming in and saying, like, kind of kicking out of the way, like, no, like, you can leave now.
Yeah.
And kind of grounding yourself, and it sounds like therapy's helped you to do that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I joke with Hector, my trainer, a lot, but I tell him that I will yell out loud if I'm in the house and my brain is kind of like doing the thing, and I'll say, like, that is not true. I mean, could you imagine? You know what I mean? But I have to say these things to myself because it's like, or I will sit there and I will make it true.
You have to be louder than that voice in your head
Yes.
sometimes, like actually physically
Yes.
like, say it, because that voice can
Yeah.
take over, and I think it often does.
Yeah.
So you're going through depression and the healing process and trying to build yourself up. At what point do you then have the capacity to start a business and start to create a broader impact beyond yourself? Was that immediately, or was that like it took time to get to a place where you're like, okay, now I feel like I'm on my 2 feet, I have the capacity to start a business?
I like to say that life doesn't stop, right? So I hit a peak in 2017 where I wasn't boggled down with the feelings of depression every day. So it gave me a clearer view, gave me a clear mind to be able to create JSculpt Fitness. But life continues to go on. So I would have ebbs and flows, but I would still have to run a business. So I can't say that the coast was clear 100%, but it was clear enough for me to know, like, I can handle this and, still have my struggles throughout life. And again, that's happened again. JSculpt has been around for 6 years now. Like I said, I've lost 50 pounds twice, so I've regressed prior to, but I still had to show up in the business. So, life goes on.
What are some of the go ahead?
And then with the following that comes with the nature of your business, does that put a certain type of pressure on you to keep up with your brand, because people are following your story, right? And so you talked about falling back into the weight, having to lose it again. Is there maybe a healthy pressure that's associated with your following?
I wouldn't say it was healthy. I wouldn't, honestly, because what I do for a living, although we do push health, a lot of it is physical. A lot of it is your physical appearance. And, people will believe you less if you're 50, 60 pounds overweight. And so it was difficult for me to show up, at the forefront or as the face of my business, being 60 pounds overweight. And, when I'm not holding the camera to my face, I'm, picking up a bag of chips, or I'm like, everything that my brand stood for, at a certain point, I was doing the exact opposite, because I was in my mode of depression. Mm-hmm. So it was extremely hard to promote a healthy lifestyle when I was living the opposite of it. And if we pull up the history, or like the data, I'm sure through those years, we probably were selling less. Because if I am the face of this brand, who's actually going to believe that what I'm pushing is true if I'm not living that truth for them?
Yeah, and talk about like just developing a sense of discipline. Because it sounds like for a period in your life, you were giving into the cravings and doing all those sorts of things, and now you're obviously extremely disciplined, at least in like your fit, like, when it comes to fitness, I'm sure in other areas of life as well. But just talk about, we talk about it a lot on this show, but just talk about how you've been able to develop, because everyone's kind of got a little different story in terms of how they've been able to kind of grow that piece of their life. So just talk about developing discipline and where that came from.
Okay, I want to just switch it just a little bit. For me at this point in my life, I guess I would say I'm more balanced than fully disciplined, if that makes sense. So
it does, but being balanced takes discipline.
Yes. So there was a point where I had to be extremely structured, disciplined, and I removed every single thing that was a distraction. And so there is a foundation to it. The discipline, you're right. So there is a foundation to it. I show up to the gym 5 days a week. I work out hour 30, so I make sure that I train for an hour with Hector. I'm doing cardio no less than 45 minutes. I make sure that I have...
I'm the Stairmaster for like an hour?
Well, these days I'm doing the treadmill.
Geez.
Yeah, these days I'm on the treadmill, but I'm usually on the treadmill for like an hour. So that is my discipline. That is my structure, and I did that for many years. Now that it's my everyday, I guess it doesn't feel so much like discipline because sometimes it's a habit, right? And so now that I am at that place in my life where this is genuinely my life, now I can indulge a little bit. Like I had a banana muffin with chocolate.
Yeah, you did.
And you know what I mean? So it's like
Hector's gonna listen to this, by the way.
Oh, so. Listen. But he knows,
yeah.
you know. So I don't restrict myself. But when I first started out, I definitely was like, no, we need to lay the foundation, and then we can slowly add some of the fun stuff back later on.
And then to MD's point, like you mentioned the sizable following, and kind of having to always have like, did you ever struggle with? Because we have other guests on that are fairly large as well. And I'm just always curious, have you struggled with like having to feel like, do you have people, some of your following that's like, well, Jaz couldn't ever be upset. How could you be upset? She's got 500,000 followers or whatever she does. She's got a successful business. Like, have you ever fell into that trap of like, oh wait, shouldn't I be like happy or whatever? Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So even prior to JSculpt, I was Jaz Jackson, but I was Jaz Jackson from YouTube. So I started a YouTube career back in 2012, and I had a pretty sizable following. And I think people's perception of influencers is where the disconnect lies, because there is this idea that if you have attention, then somehow you feel good about yourself. But we see time and time again with so many celebrities that at times this can actually be one of the worst things that happen to you, because it polarizes you in such a way where you can't really fully be yourself at all times, because you will have someone say to you, well, you have 500,000 followers. What do you mean? I'm still human. I still bleed. I'm still a person. So yeah, I've dealt with that, but I have learned, because I've done social media for such a long time. I keep my distance between taking in too much information or too many voices from the outside to just keep me grounded.
And so I want to get to,
Well, can I ask
on
that topic? So, like, then, because you started, what, you said 2012?
Yeah.
That's pretty early days of social media.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, how has your relationship with social media evolved? And how have you seen it, just broadly speaking, kind of evolve and impact mental health among influencers, etc.?
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast. That really is. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of studies done specifically on influencers that were at the cusp of social media, because 2012 was such a unique time for influencers. First of all, we weren't called influencers. People were still trying to figure out how we were making money. To put things into perspective, my first check was from Google, and it was a paper check. I know that hearing 2012 paper check, it sounds like a dinosaur, but it's also like that wasn't that long ago. And so we have evolved so much, so quickly. So I was around in a time where we would just use our phone, natural light, a tripod, and that was it. And then by 2015-16, there were huge productions, and people had like these professional lights, and it was like, and now it's companies that will that you could hire as management, and now these huge companies are coming along and they're offering you $30,000, and it's like a lot of us, especially from the mid 2000s, we were doing it just for fun. Those days are over. It's about making money now.
It's so funny how, like, Mode specifically, just there's like 5 or 6 different tripods in the gym at all times with people taking videos.
Almost tripping over them.
Yeah.
And even 2 years ago when I went to Mode for the first piece before I moved temporarily, that didn't even exist.
Yeah.
Like, there might have been one. Like, you might have been there, or like one of our other influencers might have had one, but like for them, it's just crazy how quickly things have like taken off on that front, and everyone's trying to get a little piece of like a skin in the game as it relates to like fitness content specifically. And I just wonder where we're headed, because things have moved so quickly.
I'm curious to see too, especially with AI transforming so quickly. I mean, I think the need for influencers will always be there, just because companies, especially as it relates to companies needing to promote their product. But like you said, I mean, it's no different than the boom of Airbnb. We see what's happening with Airbnb now. We see what's happening with Uber now. Like, there was a time where people were leaving their corporate jobs and working for Uber because they were making 6 figures, and now you can barely, make ends meet with Uber. It's the same thing with the influencer.
Yeah.
I want to talk about like the point you are in your life when you have a son. Are you at a point where you're like, I have everything figured out. Yes, I have my ebbs and flows, and I'm ready. And I want to kind of go down this track a little bit of like, how did having a son then, help you evolve maybe a sense of purpose? Maybe that was a healthy pressure of like, now I'm doing things for him, or maybe I want to lead by example, and I want my son to grow up following a role model that maybe you felt you didn't have in life. And like, talk to us about like, how has having a son served you in some ways?
Yeah, before you answer that question, that's great, because I only write down a handful of topics or questions, and my question shows we're getting good at this. Is this talking about your purpose and how it's evolved, and has it changed since becoming a mother?
Oh,
so
good.
Spot on
there.
Here you go.
Okay, so I'm probably gonna blow your mind, but my son is 8. He'll be 18 in November. Okay, so my kid he's a young man at this point. So I had Isaiah. Hi, Isaiah. You see this? In 2005, I was 17 years old. And so very early on, he was my motivation, right? So I grew up, we would say, in poverty, and I didn't want that to be my son's story as well. So very early on, as a young woman myself, he was the catalyst to help me push myself in ways that I probably would not have done so had he not been there. So well before becoming Jaz Jackson, I was Isaiah's mother, and I worked several jobs. I interned. I had a life in television prior to YouTube, and so everything that I did was to make sure that he had a different experience and grew up with a different perspective of life. And I'm now receiving the fruits of that labor because he's in his senior year. I'm so proud of this. So I'm glad you guys asked me. But I'm so proud of this. So Isaiah is in his senior year, and he has just been accepted to a college. I won't say the name, but he's been offered a full ride scholarship.
Wow.
And that has to be one of my greatest accomplishments in life. That will be the one thing that, when it's all said and done, I want that to be written, when people talk about me, is that I changed what could have been his story.
Yeah.
What could have, because I'm a single mom, and the statistics behind being a black woman, single mother, with the black son growing up on the south side of Chicago, and the storyline that is perpetuated about young black boys on the south side of Chicago. My son couldn't be the furthest from that, and that is my greatest accomplishment. I am
inspired.
That is
right
my
now.
greatest accomplishment.
That is.
Yeah.
I wanted to congratulate you. I mean, that is incredible.
Yeah.
And is it academic scholarship?
Yes.
That is just.
Yes, he's a smart kid, and he has a phenomenal GPA. I could not have been blessed with a better child. Like I was actually talking to my nail tech about this today because I was explaining to her, I was like, I never had to help him with homework. He was like, say he was always, if not a straight A student, he was straight A's and B's, honor roll student. So, and jokingly, like what I didn't have to focus on academically because he was such a smart kid, he had too much time on his hands in school. So sometimes he would finish work sooner than other students. And so he would be a little bit rambunctious. But other than that, like I was blessed with such a phenomenal kid. So
well, I'm sure a lot of that's attributed to his mother. So like,
I hope so.
What do you think? Like, just talk about like your experience. Like, what do you think it was? Because it's not. I agree. I'm sure part of it is just you raised a great child. So like, what did you maybe do differently like that? You experienced that maybe when you were a child that you were like, all right, I don't want to do this because I know how it affected me, so I'm going to raise him this way.
I think that I just provided him with structure because there wasn't a whole lot of structure when I was growing up. So I grew up, there were times when my mother and I were homeless, and so I lived in a plethora of shelters, and so I missed school a lot. And a lot of these things that took place in my life, it was really important for me to make sure that he didn't have the same experience. So there wasn't there wasn't any like chaos happening within our household. It was a very quiet household. So and I also allowed Isaiah to explore. I also believe that my support of allowing him to try things and just allowing him to be a kid really helps sculpt who he is today, where he's not afraid to try things. I'm sure he questions certain things, but he does have a sense of self that I didn't have when I was his age. But ultimately, I just think it was based upon the structure that was provided for him early on.
And do you think that when you undertook therapy and the practice of it and what you were learning about yourself, did it also not just make you a better version of yourself, but did it also make you a better mother?
Absolutely. Yeah, because there were darker times where, and thankfully, he was younger when it was happening. So, maybe one day he'll tell his story and he'll share some things that I don't know from his point of view. But he was younger, so he couldn't, or I tried to shield certain things from him when he was a much younger kid. But absolutely, therapy allowed me to be a calmer mother. It allowed me to be able to show up for him in ways that I otherwise would not have. I mean, I if he had anything, I was there. Birthdays, just being a present parent that I didn't necessarily have myself growing up.
Yeah, and I asked that question only just, any chance I can sell therapy, broadly. It's just a lot of people, they think it's just working on themselves, but ultimately that work that you're doing on yourself makes you a better friend, a better brother, a better father, a better mother, better spouse, right? And so I think that that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of, is that even if you're turned off to the idea or if you're uncomfortable about going and working on yourself in that regard, well, maybe it's a selfless act. Maybe it's an act that you're doing so that it's going to foster stronger and better relationships with the people that you love.
Absolutely.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. One, I just wanted to say, have you heard of like a cycle breaker?
Yes.
Yes. You are a cycle breaker. Like that is such like a great accomplishment.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I just wanted to acknowledge that first and foremost. But I also want you to talk a little bit more like what it is like, because I can't relate. MD can't relate. Most of our listeners probably can't relate to just grow up in poverty and to grow up homeless.
Yeah.
It's become a social topic near and dear to my heart, and I just want you to talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah. How do I say this? So I don't want to say we weren't living on the street, you know what I mean? So it was never to the point where we were having cups of change or anything like that, but we did live in quite a few shelters, right? It was just my reality, especially with growing up with a parent who struggled with drug abuse. So if you've ever grew up in that type of environment, then you know that every resource that is provided goes to that addiction. And so then, the walls start to crumble when every resource is going to that addiction. As a child, it was very difficult because you see things. And so when I would go to school, there would be differences that I knew right away. And obviously my friends are going home and I'm going to a shelter. That was very different for me. Or the moments that we had to live in hotels or motels, and life was very different for me then. It was a couple of years of a lot of chaos. I will say though, I personally feel like, in an odd way, I'm very thankful.
No, I don't think it's odd at all.
Yeah, I'm very thankful to that experience because it really has shaped who I am and how I view life, how I'm able to have conversations about this and can really pull from a place of, no, I really know where you're coming from if you're dealing with a hard time, but that was just my reality.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it on the show so many times, but when you were saying that's where my head was going naturally, was I was going to ask you, like, would you have changed it? And I think your answer is no.
No.
Because it's given you the perspective, and to your point, you wouldn't be where you're at if you didn't have those experiences. I relate it to my personal life so deeply. Like, there was a point where I wanted to change things. I was playing the victim card. And, and I was like, I wish this wouldn't have happened to me. Like, why am I this way? Now I wouldn't change a thing because I wouldn't be sitting here today. I wouldn't have the perspective I do had I not gone through, those dark moments, if you will. So I don't think it's odd at all. I think it's actually, it tends to be a theme, because I like to ask the question, and most people, unless like, the only time I really it hasn't clicked for someone is if it was like a loss of like a loved one, where they're, they kind of still wish it hadn't happened. But outside of that, I haven't seen anyone that's like, no, I wish I wouldn't have gone through that.
Yeah, I mean, today it makes for some great stories. I have like, there was one shelter that we stayed in. It was called A Safe Place. The actual name of it was A Safe Place. And it looked like a home off of like Seventh Heaven, or like this huge, like, it was just this picturesque home, right? It was a huge home, but it housed single mothers and their children. And some of my best memories as a child actually came from this home. And I learned community being in this shelter. We had nights where, every night we all had to eat dinner together. So imagine a huge table of 35 women and children eating together, and the community of that, and having to cook together, and the relationships that came out of that, being able to learn life skills there. There was this one room that they would get a lot of donations from people, and they had a room that was full of toys. It was like something out of a movie. And so you didn't stay there for a year, but for the year that we were there, they would pick a kid, and you would be able to go into this room and pick whatever you wanted out of this room. And to put it into perspective, how old are you guys?
How old do you think we are?
I would say late 20s.
That's spot on.
Okay.
I'm gonna start using relative stuff like late this,
like
early
that.
That's smart. Yeah,
right?
28.
Okay.
28.
So, but there was this toy called Teddy Rumpskins, but he was like this. It was right. I'm telling my age now. But anyways, someone had donated this toy, and it was like one of the hottest toys. And I was able to go in there, and it was in there, and it was like, it was just, it seems sad, but it was such a great experience looking back on it, because it was like, it was such a one-of-a-kind story that you would only hear in some rags to riches Disney film.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And then we kind of touched on it, but like, what do you feel is your purpose? When did you feel like you found it? If you haven't, maybe you're still searching for it. But if you found it, when did it kind of like click for you, and what do you think it is?
Oh, I don't feel like I've reached it yet. I think that I am getting there. I think overall, my purpose is to show people that life goes on. That you can shape your life into what you want it to be by following certain, I don't want to say rules, but just like
guideposts.
Yeah, just because if you look at where my life was and how it started to where it is now, I am just kind of like the apex of everything's gonna work out. Everything is going to be fine. And I think that it's for me to show people that just because you get knocked down once, twice, you can pick yourself back up and you can create a new story from that.
For you and for others, like your son.
Yes.
Which is
really,
I think, like when you're speaking, I can't say what your purpose is, but like I think everyone's purpose, in the deepest sense, is to serve in some way. I think Hector actually said it on the show as a first time. I'm like, yeah, and it's how you serve, and I think the way you're doing that is helping people improve holistically their health, right? I mean, through JSculpt, or else I don't think you would have had the motivation and the drive to start your own business and go through with it if it was just for the money. I mean, you tell me, but I think to me, a purpose is more than just about the money. The money is a byproduct.
Yeah, it definitely is a byproduct. I will say, starting out, it was to survive, but everything that we do is a roadmap, a little, etch in the sand to get to the next place. So, if it weren't for YouTube, I wouldn't have had the platform or the audience to build a JSculpt. If it wasn't for JSculpt, I wouldn't have built Sculpt 42. The Sculpt 42 led me to mode, well, not Sculpt 42, but my depression and weight gain led me to mode to start working out again. If I wasn't in mode, I wouldn't be here. So it all plays a role. You just have to be open to the changes, the setbacks, you have to be open to
you kind of have to surrender.
You have to surrender.
Go with the current.
Yeah.
It's going to take you where it's going to take you. It's when you resist it is when things tend to
Absolutely.
So we talked about you take a look back on your upbringing and there's now gratitude. Like, I'm grateful for the experiences I went through because it's helped build who I am today. I ask this question from a place not knowing your current relationship with your mother, but how has maybe your sentiment towards her evolved from when you were a child to where you're at today?
I have so much respect, love, and admiration for my mother because at 35, I can understand why someone might want to hop off into La La Land for a little while.
Right.
Because life is so hard at times. And, when I was a kid, I was so angry at her because it was like, how could you do this? But, as a woman, as a mother, the stresses of life, being a single mother, I fully understand it, and I have so much grace for the woman that she once was. But I am so happy and proud to say that my mother has been in recovery for 10 plus years. She did the work that she needed to do to become a better woman, and she has her own story to tell. I'm only, being her daughter, but also being a mother myself, I realize that I'm just such a small pebble of my mother's story. My mother had a life way before me that led her to make the decisions that she made, and I happened to be along for the ride. So I love her for it. Obviously I guess it would have been nice if it didn't happen, but again, if it where would I be?
Right.
Yeah.
And the evolution of like anger to now empathy.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I went through a very angry stage with my mother. 2020 was a hard. 2019, 2020 was some hard years for us. Because I was coming out or coming to terms with what my childhood was. So there was a time where I was very angry, but over on this side, yeah, nothing but gratitude.
How much better does this side feel than the prior side of it?
So much. And I want to ask her questions now. I'm just curious. I'm less concerned about her as a mother and more curious about her as a woman. I want to know, like, her name is Tiny. She's tiny. She's like 4'10". She's this little pint-sized thing. But I want to know more about her and what led her to make those decisions. Like, what? No judgment, nothing. Because, like I said, I can understand that I've had nights where I looked up and the whole wine bottle was gone. I understand that. I was battling with smoking too much weed at one point. I get it. I want to more so know what happened that led you there.
What's her story?
Yeah.
Is she open to that?
No. She goes through her own battle of what do I say? She is very sorry for the life that she gave myself and my siblings. And even though my oldest brother is 40, my younger brother is 20. He'll be 26 this year. We just say, Mom, like we water under the bridge. We just want you to live, but she carries a lot of regret that we hope that in her lifetime she can move past, but in her own time.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be on
Yeah.
her own terms. It's like any relationship with anyone. Like, they have to want to change. They have to want to be the catalyst. They have to be the catalyst.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit, because I think this will be an interesting topic before we wrap up. Just like your relationship with your personal trainer, who I know, but just talk about like how that's evolved. Like, just generally speaking, for any woman, or I guess or man, but typically woman that like gets a personal trainer, what they should expect.
There's personal trainers, and then there's Hector. So I think that my experience is a little skewed, because if you've experienced him, then you know he's nosy. He wants to know everything about your life, and I say that in a good way, because he kind of wants to gauge where you are in your life. He does understand that there's a mental component to how you'll show up for yourself in the physical, and so he's very in tune with that, and he wants to know where you are from a mental standpoint. Overall, if you can afford a personal trainer, I would suggest it, because I don't know, I don't want to say if it's just men and women, but as women, sometimes we don't push ourselves as much as we think we can, and we kind of cap ourselves on our strength levels. And so that's what a personal trainer is there for, to make sure that you can push yourself past your mental limits. And overall, if you catch the right one, I think a personal trainer is similar to that of a therapist, because sometimes...
I was just going to ask you, if someone can only afford one, therapist or a personal trainer?
No, you got to get a therapist.
I love
you
that.
You got to get a therapist, and then you got to get... And
Option C is both, by the way.
Well, I was going to say,
if you could only
get a
afford
therapist, and then you can sign up for Scope 42.
I mean, but that just goes to show the power of having your mental...
Yeah, because nothing comes after that. I mean, like your body is going to respond to what your mind tells it to do. So if your mind is telling you that you can't do something, your body is going to respond in that way.
That's it. I want to replay that. That's great. Do you have anything else you want to? All right, Jazz, we're going to wrap up here. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
3 rapid fire questions.
Ooh, okay.
Not done yet.
Fun stuff.
The first question is, what is either the best piece of advice you've ever been given, or just like a favorite quote?
Wherever you go, there you are.
Oh, I like that.
That's my favorite quote.
I like that.
You can't run
Is
from
that like
yourself.
Dr. Seuss? Or?
I don't know where it's from. Someone's going to say it in the comments, but essentially it means that you can't run from yourself. So eventually you're going to have to face what you're running from. You know, so many people when life so many people when life gets hard, it's like I'm gonna move to California. You'll be in California. Wherever you go,
the problems are going to be still there.
Yeah.
No, that's very that hits close to home. Actually, there was a point in my life where I was like, you know, I'll just move somewhere because then it'll be easier for me to deal with what I was dealing with. But looking back, it wouldn't have changed anything. I was just allowed to address what I needed to address.
Yeah, you didn't even need luggage. You came right with you.
Yeah, right. Secondly, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Ooh, dead or alive. This is gonna sound sad, but I really wish that I could have experienced my great grandmother just as a friend. And so I wish that I would have had the opportunity to just sit down and have a conversation with her. She was such a beautiful woman, and prior to living with my mother, my great grandparents raised me, and so I wish I had more time with her to just learn who she was as a woman.
Yeah, not sad at all.
Yeah.
Very authentic answer.
Yeah.
And then just what do you like to do in your free time, hobbies?
I'm trying to figure that out. I live such a busy life with JSculpt and my son, but now that he's near graduation and heading off to college, I have to find something to do besides being in his business. So I've been thinking that takes up a lot of your time. But I've been wanting to do like pottery classes and take like cooking classes. I want to travel because the thing is, I've been a parent as long as I've been an adult. So I've been raising him since 17 years old. I don't know life outside of being a parent. And so this next chapter of my life is just really me rediscovering who I am, because I don't know Jazz outside of being mom.
That's so exciting. I'm
excited.
And
I'm still young. I look great. So I'm just like, I'm gonna have some fun.
That's super exciting.
I'm gonna have some fun.
All right, we're gonna wrap up here. Thanks again, Jazz.
Thanks, Jazz. Thank you.